but I think they use it in trying to get out on whatever they call it, streaming. Is that it? Some people stream, some people scream. So let's go back to chapter 1. Key thought comes from the preacher, which is Solomon. Vanity of vanities. Verse 1, all is vanity. Well, that's really encouraging. It's almost depressing. I start go there. And then he goes about the idea. He goes through several things that take place, some examples about one generation passes, another comes, sun goes up and goes down the same every day, if you will. The wind does the same, if you will. Eyes never full, the ears never full. And so verse 9, he says, there's no new thing under the sun. And Solomon's general approach to the study in the book of Ecclesiastes is he is viewing things as they are seen from under the sun, which means from earth's point of view, and not as God would see things, but as man sees them when he leaves God out. And he'll introduce God to it in the process there. So he says in verse 13, I gave my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all things that are done under heaven. That sets the course and direction, which writing the book is going to be about. Verse 14, I have seen all the works that are done under the sun. That's the same as under the heaven. And he says, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. Wow, that's just not very encouraging at all. It's and he talked about himself in verse 16. He's come to great estate, gotten more wisdom than all those which have been before me. My heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And so Solomon says, I know where I'm coming from because I've been there. I've had it all. Had it all. And much in wisdom is much grief. Then in chapter 2, he goes back to that. He says, I'm going to prove these. So he's going to introduce some things which he's going to discuss quickly here. He's going to talk about pleasure. In verse 1, he says, you know, we'll prove thee with pleasure. So enjoy pleasure. He said, that's vanity. And he said, laughter, mad, and what does it do? And then he talked about his heart given to wine. That he said, all that was good for the sons of men, which they should do under heaven, latter part of verse 3, all the days of their life. In verse 4, he talked about this. He said, they made me what? Great works. Solomon noted for his building. Yes, he was, wasn't he? Great works. And he talks about some of the things he had done in there. He had planted vineyards and gardens and orchards and had pools of water and all kinds of trees and fruits, and had maidservants and men servants, and had great possessions, had great numbers of cattle there. Verse 8, he had silver and gold and all the peculiar treasures of kings and provinces. Had men singers, women singers, verse 8. And the delights of the Son of Man. He had everything one could possibly want as far as this earth is concerned. In fact, he himself says in verse 9, I was great and increased, how much? More than all they that were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. Paul says, Solomon says, I've been more, I've had more, I've done more than anybody's been before me. In fact, he said, whatever my eyes desired in verse 10, I said, I kept not from them. I held not my heart from any joy. My heart rejoiced in my labor. That's one thing he did say that he rejoiced in, was his labor, the things that he did, by the way. Then, verse 11, he looked on the works of his hands. And then he said, all was what, latter part of verse 11? All was vanity and vexation of spirit. Well, what about wisdom and madness and folly? Verse 12. And what can the man do that cometh after the king, even that which hath already been done? Is all those things are things which already been. He said, I saw that wisdom, verse 13, he did say this, I saw that wisdom excelleth folly, as far as light excelleth darkness. So in a comparison between wisdom and darkness, he gave the check mark to wisdom, didn't he? Wise man's eyes are in his head, but, verse 14, the fool walketh in darkness. And then he said, I perceived also that one event happened unto them all. Wise men, you know, he has light. The fool is a man that has no understanding and cannot be taught. That's who the fool is. He said, but there's one event, the wise man and the fool, happens to everybody. What's that? Death. So the time is coming. And he said, verse 15, as it happened to the fool, so happened even to me. And why was I more wise than they? Then I said in my heart, this also is vanity. So Solomon's wisdom, he looks at it, he makes comparison of it, and well, while he's in earth, you know, wisdom has some advantage. Bottom line, when you get to the end of the row, it'll be the same for both. Yeah. No remembrance of the wise more than the fool. And the latter part of verse 16 says, and how dieth the wise man? He said, as the fool. As the fool. And so, therefore I hated life. He hated his works of life there. Because the work that's wrought under the sun is grievous unto me. All is vanity and vexation of spirit. He said he hated his labor, verse 18, because, why? I should leave it unto the man that shall be after me. Said, I'm going to be gone. It's going to be left somebody else. And verse 19, it says, who knoweth whether he shall be a wise man or a fool? Well, Solomon was succeeded on the throne by his son Rehoboam. How'd that turn out? Didn't do too good, did it, Emmer? Rehoboam took the kingdom and divided it right away and didn't have the wisdom. And so I showed myself wise, and this also is vanity. So, well, the kingdom grew to its greatest extent under Solomon's rule. The kingdom had peace during Solomon's reign for some 40 years. The people of the earth round about had great respect for Solomon. Some, like the Queen of Sheba, for example, traveled many, many miles just to come and to talk with him. What'd she say? The half has not yet been told me, did she? So he said in 20, when about to cause my heart to despair of all the labor which I took under the sun. You got a man who labors in wisdom and knowledge and equity, yet to a man that hath not labored therein shall he leave it for his portion. This also is vanity and a great evil. So a fellow gets out and he labors and he works and he applies himself and he does well, and then he turns around and it goes to somebody else. What hath man of all his labor, and wherein he hath labored under the sun? Verse 23, all his days, his life are sorrows, his trail grief, his heartache taketh not rest in the night. This also is vanity. Verse 24 is a turning key. It's an important verse. Not that the others are not, but it's kind of a key verse, and it does introduce a different aspect to his thinking process. There is nothing better for a man, that is, given what he's just been talking about, than that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God. Yeah. So Solomon says, here's what life is about. You labor, you work. Go ahead and enjoy your labor and you work. And the benefits which God gives us, recognizing that all of our blessings are those blessings which come from God, if you will. And who can eat, or who else can hasten hereunto more than I? No one can do more than Solomon did. And verse 26, for God giveth to a man that is good in his sight wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner he giveth travail to gather and to heap up, that he may give to him that is good before God. This also is vanity and vexation of spirit. So God's blessings to those who are understandable from whence they come are given to those, he says here, who has some wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, the ungodly man, he says all his labors really end up toward the benefit of whom? The faithful servant of God. How does that work out? Really pretty good, doesn't it? God's servants oftentimes been disobedient. God oftentimes will use those who are contrary to His will to help His servants get back on the right path, I guess would be one way of putting it in there. And so we benefit sometimes in that particular way. And someone says, well, it's a good thing that we got a lot of bad people in the world. That's not necessarily the right conclusion. But let's go to chapter 3. He's going to talk about the reasonable attitude toward life and death. This first section on this passage reminds me of a brother in Christ who used to be here, Brother Carl Long. And Brother Carl liked the book of Ecclesiastes, and he liked the 3rd chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes. And I remember sitting in his house, and we would talk about that in the process. And a season, and for everything there's a season and a time, and to every purpose under heaven. And he talks about several things about which are, and which are not, and they are, and they're not. So he's just do it this way: time to be born, and a time to die. Well, that's the way it is. Some fellow said this is where the rubber hits the road, isn't it? And it is what it is. And time to plant, time to pluck up that which is planted, that's a cycle. Time to kill, a time to heal. He's not advocating murder. Someone thinks he might be talking about animals or something like that, but nonetheless, it's a cycle. Time to break down, a time to build up. Sometimes you have to break things down before you can build them up. Time to weep, time to laugh, time to mourn, time to dance. And he's not talking about lasciviousness here in this particular place there. He's just talking about the rejoicing and happiness there. You know, we have mourning as a part of life. Everybody has to go through that sort of thing. But there's times of joy also there. Time to cast away thrones and stones, and time to gather stones together. A lot of various interpretations which people give of that particular verse. Me, being of a simple mind, I kind of look at it this way. You know, if you have a field out here and full of stones and things, what do? You get out there and throw them out, don't you? And if you build into something there, you can gather the stones together and you can put them together and build, make a wall or something out of them, whatever you want to do. And time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing, a time to get, a time to lose, time to keep, a time to cast away. Verse 7, a time to rend and a time to sow, time to keep silence and a time to speak. A lot of people have a problem with that. And they don't know when to keep silent and when to shut up. Solomon says there's a time for that. Verse 8, a time to love and a time to hate. God hates, what does God want us to hate? Every evil way? Yeah. Back in Malachi, I believe it's 2:16, says he hates divorce. You know, there's some things which we ought not be advocating, upholding, that's at all. And that's so. And time of peace, time of war, and a time of peace. So then he kind of concludes a little bit in verse 9 in the process there. Makes some observations between some time elements there. He said, what profit hath thee that worketh in that wherein he laboreth? He just got through talking about the various cycles and events in life which take place. He said, well, what profit is there? And he says, I've seen the travail which God hath given to the sons of men to be exercised therein. Travail means difficulties and times of sadness and sorrow, I guess. And then he says in verse 11, I like this verse. I need to get you to help me to like it even more, I guess. He says, he hath made everything what? Beautiful in his time. And so when we go back and look at the things that God has made, they really are things which are beautiful. And fellow says if you're looking at the animal world, it might be one animal looking at another of the same kind being considered beautiful, but nonetheless, God's work in God's hand is just absolutely perfect in everything. And look, he says he's set the world in their hearts so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning of the end. That's an interesting expression there. He set the world in their hand. And the idea of the world here has to do with the idea of basically talks about the time element of the world. On down in verse 14, he uses the word forever, which is the same. So when man looks at the events and the things which God has made, can man look back and say, well, here, I can tell you everything there is about the things that God made. Is that the case? Can't do it. But that doesn't mean it doesn't stuff there. He says, I know that is good to them, but for man to rejoice and to do good in his life. That goes back basically the same thought introduced back in verse 24 of chapter 2. And verse 13, also that every man should, again, verse 24, eat and drink, enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. So that puts us in place. There's another I know in verse 14. He says, I know that whatsoever God doeth, it shall be forever. Nothing can be put to it, nor anything taken from it. And God doeth it, that men should fear before him. Kind of maybe a hermeneutical aspect here, if we want to add it in here. Talks about whatever God it shall be forever. What does it mean forever? Well, the latter part of the verse says you can't add anything to it, you can't take anything away from it. So what he's done, it's there. Not going to be changed in the process. Great thing. So God is good for a man to rejoice and do good in his life, and recognize that our blessings come from God. It's a gift of God. And then in verse 14 he has another, I know, whatsoever God doeth will be forever. Nothing to it. Then on down in verse 15 he says this, that which hath been is now, that which is to be has already been, and God requireth that which is past. And so that goes back to the same general theory and the flow of things introduced in the first several verses of chapter 3, where there's a time for this and a time for that. And so, and the idea that there's no new thing under the sun. And someone says, I thought I had something new going here. Oh, no. And that doesn't demean or take away from one's life. In fact, one who is living in Christ, according to God's will, is one who is greatly blessed, not only in this world, but because it's that which comes from God, as Solomon will get to later on in the book of Ecclesiastes, and the eternal blessings which come from him, if you will. Well, there's some other areas that Solomon addresses. In verse 16, he talks about the place of judgment. And said there's wickedness was there. And he talked about the place of righteousness. And wickedness was there. Well, you ever heard of the places of judgment being perverted? Not uncommon at all, is it, the process? And the place that's supposed to be righteous, oftentimes there's the same concept there too. I go back and I think about the religious world in which we live today. There's so many people in our world, good people. We know them, we talk with them, we visit with them, have discussions from time to time. But they've taken the things of God in a religious way specifically, and they've introduced the things of man into them, and they've taken away part of God's things. And that's not new, not at all. And so he makes this observation, verse 17, I said in mine heart. That means he had a talk with himself. I said in mine heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every purpose and every work. Then in verse 18 he says, I said in mine heart, concerning the estate of the sons of men, that God might manifest them, and that they might see that they themselves are what? Beast. Wow. Growl. And, well, why so? Let's go on. For that which befalleth the sons of men befalleth what? Beast. Even one thing befalleth them, as the one dieth, so dieth the other. Yea, they have all one breath, so that a man hath no preeminence above a beast. All is vanity. Make a note, and on your own reading, go back and read Psalm. This statement's basically in Psalm 49:12. Just read the 49th Psalm. It's really kind of a commentary really on this third chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes. So, looking at man from Earth's point of view, under the sun, he spends his days upon his earth, then he goes. He looks at his pet animals, they spend their days upon the earth, and then they're gone. What's the difference? All have the same ending, don't they? There you go. All go unto one place. How about that in verse 20? All are of the dust, and all shall return to the dust again. So when it says all go unto one place, then the context speaks specifically about going to what kind of place? Going back to dust. Yeah. And that's what happens to the physical bodies. That's what man sees under the sun. Dust shall return to dust. Verse chapter 12 and verse 9, I believe it is in Ecclesiastes. And the spirit returns to God who gave it. Yeah. Verse 21, who knoweth the spirit of man that goeth upward, and the spirit of the beast that goeth downward to the earth? We don't know what happens to the spirit, although we'll find out a little bit later on. Chapter 12 again, verse 9. Wherefore, verse 22, I perceive that there is nothing better than a man should rejoice in his own work, for that is his portion, for who shall bring him to see what shall be after him? So as one would look at it from under the sun, Solomon says, given things as they are, best thing for man to do is just go ahead and rejoice and enjoy his own works and partake of them and be thankful for them, because he doesn't know, you don't know what's going to be hereafter. And later on, when God is introduced in a more effective way, then we'll learn it. Chapter 4. This talks about some vanity and disappointments of earthly life. There's another group of things here by which vanity is demonstrated, according to a statement out. The term PPC, by the way, on your notes there, pulpit commentary. And when I originally made these notes, I made them for Jim, so I didn't I didn't expand upon them sometime when I should have. So he says this, I return, considered all the oppressions that are done under the sun. The tears, as such as were oppressed, they had no comforter. And on the side of their oppressors there was power, but they had no comforter. Wherefore I praise the dead, which are already dead, more than the living, which are yet alive. How so, Solomon? Verse 3, better is he than both they which hath not yet been, who hath not seen the evil work that is done under the sun. So the one who has never yet been born, Solomon says, is better off than the one who has been and seen all the travail and turmoil that's under the sun. So again, he considered travail of every right work in verse 4. And that for this a man is envied of his neighbor. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. Solomon says, out here is a fellow who works hard, is industrious, and he does well, makes some good progress. What happens? His neighbor down the street who does nothing is jealous of him and envious of him. And so the neighbor is described in verse 5 as the fool. The fool foldeth his hands together. It says, and eateth his own flesh. I wonder if he puts any ketchup on it when he does. Reckon? I don't know. Well, what about eating his own flesh there? Well, simply means the idea that he's going in such a direction it's going to be to the demise of his own self. You know, a fellow who folds his hand, what's proverb? Do we have that proverb listed in your notes? And the fellow that folds his hand, Proverbs 20, I think is what it is. Let me see if I have a note on that. Yeah, there you go. 6 and 10. Little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands. And so there you go. And so he says here in verse, it's just the destruction of his own flesh. Better is a handful with quietness than both the hands full with travail and vexation of spirit, is the idea. So you can be like the fellow who gets out and works hard and gets all this other, and other people come along and try to envy or do harm to him in the process. And so he's not saying, I don't think he's saying to you when he says it is better and have a handful with quietness and both the hands full with travail and vexation spirit. If you have what you need, be satisfied, but better that than be overwhelmed with goods and things of that nature, because that's when you draw your enemies' unhappiness down the street from you in that process. So he begins again in verse 7, he says, I returned and I saw vanity under the sun. And here's an interesting section here in chapter 4. He said, there's one alone, not a second, and he hath neither child nor brother, yet is there no end of all his labor. And so here's a fellow who's just by himself. That's not a good way to be in this world. And he works in his labor. If he doesn't have a child, he doesn't have a brother, he doesn't have anybody else. That's all he has. And it says his eye is not, neither is his eye satisfied with riches, neither saith he, for whom do I labor, and bereave my soul of good. This is also vanity, yea, and it is sore travail. One fellow by himself, working, laboring, gathering everything together. Why? What's he going to do with it? Doesn't have any children, doesn't have any family. And all he's doing is says, you know, if you get some, what's he going to do? I'll just go out and try to get more. That's what we do. And so he says in verse 9, two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. If they fall, verse 10, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him that is alone when he falleth, for he hath not another to help him up. Y'all ever know of a situation where somebody was living by themselves and not in the best of health, and you're always worried and concerned about they would do what? They'd fall. That's what we worry about. Nobody there to pick them up. But if there's two there, you got that problem. And he talks about two lie together, then they have heat. But how can one be warm alone? One prevailed against him, two shall withstand him, and threefold cord is not easily broken. So two together, you know, they can get together like men and woman does, and sometimes they can be warm. That's good. That's a great benefit, where the one can't do it by himself. And then he talks about when somebody prevails against him, two shall withstand him, or the one who is prevailing against him. And then he talks about a threefold cord. It's not easily broken. What do you mean a threefold cord? Maybe one more? And threefold that's that much more strength that you have in the process there. So those relationships is pretty good. So in 13 he says, better is a poor and a wise child. This talks about an interesting relationship here in chapter 4 and talks about the young child and the king. He said, better is a poor and a wise child than an old and foolish king who will no more be admonished. Now here's a king who has years upon him, and he's beyond the age of being willing to accept instruction from anybody. So I said, don't bother me with information, okay? Out of prison he cometh to reign, whereas also he that is born in his kingdom becometh poor. A lot of difficulties among various ones who write about these particular verses. Just exactly who and what is he talking about here. I'm going to give you a thought, and I think contextually it'll probably bear out pretty good. He out of prison, he cometh to reign. Someone out of prison, and we would think it would probably have reference back to that poor and wise child. So thought grows up anyway. He grows up, and eventually he'll be the one who is reigning. And then, as things would be, he also that is born in his kingdom becometh poor. And so the kingdom grows up, and people grow up in his kingdom, and they turn around, they end up being in a situation being poor too. And so Solomon says, I consider all the living which walk under the sun. I think that kind of sets the general context. With the second child that shall stand up in his stead. That second child, I think, again, would have a reference back to the one introduced back in verse 13. And the one who would stand up in his stead, that's the old foolish king, most likely referenced to there. And so he says, there's no end of all the people, even of all that have sinned been before them, they also shall come after. They also that come after shall not rejoice in him. Surely also, this also is vanity and vexation of spirit. And so the thing again goes back to the idea of what goes around comes around. The people, someone gets up to a position of maybe rulership. He gets old, don't rule. Someone else comes along and takes over. People don't do well there. It just seems like a vicious cycle in some particular way. There's no end of all the people, even of all that have been before them. They shall come after, shall not rejoice in him. And so the one who grows up also is one among whom the people apparently are unable and to rejoice because he is now there in that position of leadership or power or what have you. Just don't know. Just don't know. Yeah. Let's look at chapter 5, see what we can find out here right quick. Chapter 5, really going on in the early part of chapter 6, talks about the emptiness and the selfish of life. And just to note, I don't think I've said anything about it. You see that little block, square block there? It says 5, 1 through 7, the religious wisdom of this world. And those notes that I have in yours in a box like that are from Brother Franklin Camp. And so that's another one of those I put in there for Jim's benefit and didn't think about somebody else. Brother Franklin Camp, that's his expression of the first 7 verses here. Wisdom of this world, warns against false religion, unable to secure. Let's look at the first 7 verses here. Keep thy foot when thou goest into the house of God. Be ready to hear, than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they consider not that they do evil. That's really a very enlightening verse in the process. What does it mean to keep your foot when you go into the house of God? I ask you first now, sir. I think it carries the idea when you're keeping your feet, that means you're well stable, balanced. You know, you're not going in a haphazard manner or something like that. And when you go in there, be ready to hear, and more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools. I think we could apply that maybe even to our assemblies in our day and age. When we come in to worship God, we need to come in prepared to do that. Need to come in prepared to hear, and that. And when we not to make the sacrifice of fools, for they consider not that they do evil. What's the picture? Do what? They think they're right. They're going through activities wherein they think they're worshiping God, don't they? And all the time, they're doing that which would label them really as a fool. Not a very nice picture. And they never stop to think. They don't ever realize that what they're doing is an evil thing. When someone goes into the presence of God, haphazard manner, and professes to worship God, and not even willing to listen to what God has to say, that's an evil thing. So we need to be careful. Don't be rash with your mouth, verse 2. Let not your heart be hasty to utter anything before God, for God is in heaven, and thou upon the earth, therefore let thy words be few. That's a pretty good admonition, isn't it? Need to be careful what words we utter before God. By thy words thou shalt be justified, and by thy words thou shalt be condemned. Seems like I read that somewhere in the book of Matthew. And God hear what we say? Every word. That's scary, isn't it? And it is. And talks about a dream, comes through the multitude of business, and a fool's voice is known by the multitude of words. Why do we have dreams, and what do we dream about? Usually, and I don't know too much about dreams. I don't have as many. I wish I didn't have any, to tell you the truth, but I have some occasionally. Usually we have dreams because we've been involved in some kind of activity, something we've been involved in. We're thinking about something, working on something, doing something, worried about something. Some activity that's going on in our life cause that, isn't that? And so through the multitude of business, then he talks about the fool and his voice. He's going to talk about that voice a little bit more on down in the next verse. Is known by the multitude of words. Easy way to recognize someone as a fool is what? Listen, what he just won't shut up. He just won't shut up. When you make a vow, verse 4, defer not to pay it, for he hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou hast vowed. Again, a vow is someone, it's a commitment that you make, a process. And if you make the vow of that, then we need to be sure that we fulfill what we do what we say we're going to do. If you're not going to do it, don't say it. And better not to vow than you should vow not pay. The next verse he said. And then in verse 6 he goes back to that mouth problem. He says, suffer not thy mouth to cause thy flesh to sin. Neither say thou before the angel that it was an error. Wherefore should God be angry at thy voice and destroy the work of thy hands? Interesting verse. We don't have any problem with the idea. Don't let your mouth cause you to sin, and the mouth can do that, as you well know. And don't say thou before the angel. I don't know who the angel is. Maybe you can do and you can help us. But don't say that it was an error. And so, in other words, if you make a vow and say you're going to do something, and then you don't get it done, then you go back and you say, well, I just, really didn't mean that. And so you try to justify in some way not doing what you promised you would do. Various ideas about who the angel is. I don't know from the biblical perspective how to try to identify any particular angel. The word angel means messengers, and an angel of God is a messenger from God. But the idea is that God knows and he's aware, and just exactly how he employs his angels and those things, I don't know how to go about determining that altogether. Somewhat, but not altogether. The multitude of dreams, many words there are, that also divers vanities, but fear thou God. So be careful how you administrate your dreams and your words. Verse 8, opposition. Seest the oppression of the poor, violent perverting of judgment and justice in the province. Marvel not at the matter, for he that is higher than the highest regardeth it, and there be higher than they. The idea seems to be this. Not an unusual thing for the poor to be brought in the eye and judgment be unjust against him, what have you. And not only there, but throughout the province. And the fellow that does that judgment, he ought to be careful, because there's someone who's above him, and he also is going to be answerable to somebody. And there's even one who's higher than they. Of course, God ultimately is the judge of all people and all things, I think is the idea. And the prophet, verse 9, the prophet of the earth is for all, and the king himself is served of the field. Well, the earth is for all. When the king gets ready to go eat his meal, what does he eat? Yeah, that which came from where? Came from the same place that the poor man's food comes from. Comes out of the same field. And, he that loves silver shall not be satisfied with silver. He that loveth abundance with increase. And so somebody who's given a love in silver, they're never satisfied. And you love a great abundance, you'll never be satisfied, if that's what your goal in life is. And when goods increase, they're increased that eat them. I like that verse, verse 11. When you have more food on the table, what do you have? You have more feet under the table, round about. And what good is there to the owners thereof, save and beholding of them which with their eyes? Sleep of a laboring man, verse 12. Whether he eateth little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not suffer him to sleep. Why not? Why can't the rich man sleep? Yeah, his mind's on his money, isn't it? Somebody going to get it, or some way he can get some more, something like that seems to be the idea. And he came forth, look at verse 15. As he came forth from his mother's womb, naked shall he return to go as he came, and shall take nothing of labor, which he may carry away in his hand. And so he came into this world without any clothes, and he'll go out the same way, no matter what he gets in between. Sore evil, verse 16, that in all points as he came, so shall he go. What profit hath he that labored for the wind? Now, when you just look at things from under the sun, it doesn't come out so well. All his days also he eateth darkness, eateth in darkness. He hath much sorrow and wrath with his sickness. And verse 18, and behold, that which I have seen, and Solomon says, is good and comely for one to eat and to drink and to enjoy good of all his labor that he taketh under the sun all the days of his life, which God giveth him, for it is his portion. That goes back to the thought introduced in chapter 2 and verse 24. The things that you receive, recognize from whence they come, be thankful for them, use them, enjoy them, and let that be it. Every man also to whom God hath given riches and wealth, and God does, 19, and hath given him power to eat thereof, and to take his portion, and to rejoice in his labor, this is what? Gift of God. Solomon could certainly testify to that, couldn't he? That's where he got all of his. For he shall not much remember the days of his life, because God answereth him in the joy of his heart. So, interesting thoughts. I want us to look for the next 4 or 5 minutes at our study questions. I'm trying to review those as we go, if we have success in doing so. Thought it might be helpful to you. Chapter 3, we don't have many. Talks about some kind of workings of God which can be seen, and there's a time for everything. The word there is not in the text there. It's in the, what did you say? Providential. Providential is exactly what I have. Remember, providential workings. Bible says there's a time to dance. We know this verse is not speaking of what? The lasciviousness of the modern dance. Galatians 5 and 19, that lasciviousness is work of the flesh. How has God set the world in their heart, verse 11. The word world probably would be best translated by the term of eternity, I think. Long periods of time and over life. And so, his world, this man's world, that means his life or the expanse of it. Seems that man inherently desires to know that which is unknowable, but only observing the manifestation of earthly events. So, number 32, wickedness in the place of justice indicates what kind of judicial system? Yeah, huh? Perverted, yeah. Corrupted, perverted judicial system, that'll work. Man hath no preeminence above the beast, is speaking in regard to suffering and death. Chapter 4, the sad lot of those under is in consideration, first 3 verses. Oppression, that which evokes envy of his neighbor, is said to be the fool's defense for laziness. That is V&V, vanity and vexation. Refusing to work, which results in self-destruction, that eats himself, is described as, did I write that in on yours too? Eateth his own flesh. That's a gimme, I guess. Number 37, what 3 advantages of partners? If one failed, the other could. It is, if 2 lie together, it's what? Warmer. 2 are stronger against the enemy. 38, a threefold cord is not quickly broken, is a proverbial statement meaning the union provides strength. Yeah. The principal lesson of 4:13 through 16 is, I'm going to give that one, I have popularity or dominion, or only for a time, yeah, only for a time. Soon wanes, and others replace you. Chapter 5. Be careful of conduct is found in this statement. Keep thy what when you go into the house of God. Sacrifice without hearing the Lord and obeying Him is a sacrifice of, verse 1, fools. And number 42, because God is in heaven, He, that is God, and we on earth, the creation, one should not be hasty to utter anything before God. That'd be hard to figure out if you didn't have it there. Number 43, a fool's voice is made known by what? Multitude of words, isn't it? One who vows a vow unto God and does not pay it is considered a what? He's a fool. Number 45, neither say thou before the angel, that is an error, means do not attempt to excuse yourself from fulfilling vows or commitments to God. 46, oppressive rulers are the ones higher and the highest, but ultimately, who is higher than all? God. 47, to Solomon, the only advantage to the owner of riches was really none. They were only something to behold and anticipate more increase. Number 48, the abundance of the rich caused him to lose sleep. Verse 49, but the fortunate, by the unfortunate circumstances in life, riches do by evil travail. They perish, right. And last, according to verses 18 through 20, our natural blessings are to be considered as a gift from God. Thank you, folks. Let's begin to close with prayer. Brother Reggie, lead our closing prayer, brother. Amen. Thank you, brother.